educational and informative to me about it was the enormous scope of this.
I think it's just the doors open.
Okay, so that's what this is, I mean, I knew it was a terribly complicated problem before we ever got started, but I know you try to make it simplified, but it just makes it reinforces how complicated it is. The $332 million became available when?
Fiscal year 2022, so that'd be 2021. So these
5
are
years ago.
quite, but
4 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in that 4 years, we've built 1,600 units?
no. Those are some of these developments are in preliminary stages of financing. So
Oh, so we've either built or started 1,600 units?
no.
No?
Again,
Trying to get to yes on something.
sorry.
That's all right.
I don't. I mean, the last time I checked, we had built about 70 units.
70 units?
Yeah, and then there were, maybe 800 more under construction, and then
Okay.
so some of this is theoretical, right? Like,
But what's
Yeah.
not theoretical is the 25,000 that are needed.
no, that's certainly one estimate.
So,
and,
I mean,
and-
it looks like that the way that we're going, it'll be decades before you reach the 25,000. Not you.
No,
but for the 25,000 is
we
reached.
simply will not. We will never. I know never is a long time, but we will never reach that goal doing it this way at these subsidy levels with these time frames.
And I have one other question, but I don't want to hog anybody's time here, but with the money that was given to the rehabs, is that for low, moderate income people, or is it?
Yes. So the use of the low income housing tax credit, these units are not. There's a period of affordability
Yes.
that comes with them.
Okay, so when you say the period, I'm sorry, I just
No,
don't
no.
want to take up too much time here. So there's a requirement.
Well, if you think about it, some of these developments have been in service for 25 years. Now imagine if you didn't do any work on your house for 25
No, I
years.
understand. I just want to
have
make sure there's a commitment when people accept the money, there's an
Oh
enforcement.
yeah, the term of affordability then extends another 30 years from there.
We don't want to see people just take the money and run, as the old saying goes.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And again, I don't run these programs. I just
I
I just study them and report.
Representative, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. When we heard you guys were coming in, I heard a couple of members say, why are you guys coming in? Because it's tenant landlord. And I guess my first statement's going to be, I hope you guys are going to be presenting this to the Housing Commission. Or if you haven't already, you will be presenting to the Housing Commission. So I just want to get on record as saying that, because obviously it's more vital there, quite frankly, than it is the work we're doing.
We did that at 1:30.
Yeah.
So
Okay, good deal. Good to know. Just glad to see we maximize your time. But I think where it's important here is that a part of what we're dealing with right now, dealing with this Landlord Tenant Act, is it's come up because of the conflicts that have come out of these two demographics, because of the cost. We have calls for rent control because people can't afford homes. But on the other side, the landlords have to pay and maintain these places, or even purchase them and service their mortgages. And so you have this intense conflict, and this is what you're describing that's where the problem comes from. You came in here to describe why we are here at its core, and that we've regulated ourselves into this corner. And as a statement, I will have questions. I do intend to have questions. But as a statement, we're not going to regulate ourselves out of this. We can deregulate ourselves out of this from my perspective, but we're not going to regulate ourselves out of this. I often use the nursing home industry as a comparison. We overregulate them, and we're continuing to overregulate them, and all we're getting is even poorer results. So I hope we don't make that mistake in this particular industry. To my questions now, reference the work we're doing in that line. You talk about out-of-state folks coming in and purchasing homes. When you're accounting for that, I think definitely I understand that you're counting residential homes. So we're seeing Massachusetts people coming down here, buying a home for $500,000 that would cost them $700,000 because they're getting Beltway, Boston Beltway wages. Are you seeing comparable changes in terms of out-of-state corporations and non-domestic Rhode Island corporations getting involved in the rental markets, pushing out mom and pops?
It's an excellent question. It's not something we covered in the report. And I can say, while researching this, that was not something we came across.
So it wasn't important. So the
I'm not
data
saying it
point
doesn't
didn't come
exist.
up.
I just
The
couldn't
data
tell.
point didn't come up enough. So when you're doing your basic work through the research, it didn't pop out. So obviously you made the point to mention 5% of all real estate sales are coming from Massachusetts residents. And you also made the
25.
point
that's
that
25% of all home sales are from
yeah,
Massachusetts.
and then also you made the point that, short-term rentals are also having impact, so you're seeing that. But nothing in the data showed out-of-state corporations coming in here and increasing their influence on the rental market in Rhode Island?
I can just tell you that I did not look for that specifically. I did not come across that while researching. So some of that is just where your focus is. So I couldn't speak authoritatively on that point based on the research I've done.
Right. Thank you.
Ms. Weinstein?
Hi, thank you for this work on the report that you did. It's great. In going back to the affordability issue, I know we hear a lot, and as Representative Place was saying, a lot of the friction that we're hearing right now in our committee and what we're studying is between landlords and tenants and how to make things more affordable and create better living environments. What I found interesting in your report, but didn't find it shocking, is that affordability, when you looked at that, there was actually a larger number of homeowners that were cost burdened in this state compared to renters. I'm not shocked by that, especially with the cost of housing right now and inflation in general being an issue. Everything across the board costs more money right now. So that's something that should be considered. It's not just renters, it's Rhode Islanders in general, whether you own a home or not. Landlords make up part of that statistic of homeowners. Those costs are obviously going to get passed down to our tenants. The cost of everything is expensive right now. And then also, going back to affordability here in Rhode Island versus Massachusetts and our other neighboring states, Connecticut, or even as far as New York and whatnot, we do seem to be the most affordable state in Rhode Island, in New England, and possibly even the Northeast. So people are coming here. It's creating more demand. And when I look at the numbers, especially just using Zillow as a data set, I find that a lot of people, all my clients use Zillow, everyone I know uses Zillow, so I feel like it's a large sample set. The median rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in Rhode Island is $2,200 on Zillow. That's not including current rentals of people in their houses right now or renewing, but new market rents, $2,200. That matches up quite well with affordability when we're looking at the 30% to 40% affordability factor with Rhode Islanders, if they're looking at median income being $86,000 a year. With those numbers, it says that our median rents are maybe more affordable than what we've been given credit for in the media, maybe. But in comparison to Massachusetts, is my point. Massachusetts, there seems to be a large disparity between the affordability there. In Massachusetts, the median rent for a 3-bedroom rental is $3,150. Their income is higher, $101,000 a year. But when you look at that, it's not affordable. They have a $500 disparity there between what their median income is and what their median rents are. So I think it's just a good factor to consider that Rhode Island is more affordable compared to our neighboring states. And as your report suggested, I think you suggested that, our rents aren't as high as what's been reported in the news and whatnot.
I think that's fair. Where I would push back a little bit is that if you're gonna look at rents alone, you have to look not at median income, but median renter incomes. And the median renter income in Rhode Island is about half of the rent, the homeowner income. So, I mean, our renters make about $45,000 a year on
Okay.
average. So that,
Is that median household though? Because when I looked at those numbers, the median household, not of renters, just Rhode Islanders in general.
no, the median household, you have that number, right? It's
Okay.
81,000. But
Yeah.
if you just look at a subset of renters, that number's a lot lower. It's $45,000
Per person.
per household.
Okay.
I'll double check.
Okay.
But I could just say our average renter makes less than the average in
Okay.
Rhode Island, and it's about half as much.
Okay.
And again, well, I mean, the median income is 81,000, so that the median renter income is 45,000. I have to check if that's
For
an individual
household?
or a household.
Okay. I was pretty sure that we checked household, but yeah, I'd like to get those numbers if we can.
Representative Morales?
Thank you, Judge Smith. So similarly, I also just wanted to point for the record while we're on the commission as well that when we look at the difference between cost burdenship between renters and homeowners on a per capita basis, the burden falls higher on renters, being at 45% of renters who are cost burdened as noted on page 3 of the report summary compared to 28% of homeowners. So again, I just think that's important context for us to have as we have these conversations. Mr. Hamill, going back to the recommendation number 5 that was made around rental assistance. Could you elaborate further as to any particular programs that the state has either had in the past? I know we've had rent relief, for example. I know when looking at the report as well, there was a reference made to the state rental assistance program that was installed back in the 80s and 90s. But any recommendations that RIPAC has around what a state rental assistance program could look like?
So Representative, we did have a rental assistance program. It's almost defunct. There's very few families, so we don't do that. I think there's sometimes opposition to rental assistance because of the moral hazard of once someone gets rental assistance, then but I do think it's worth considering, particularly for people who are disabled, or folks that don't really have much in the way of other options. Because what we're doing is we're using massive amounts of capital to subsidize those. If you have someone at 30% area median income, the amount of subsidy you need to support a construction of a new unit for them, you're talking about a development that may need $2,500, $3,000 a month rent, and you have someone who's can only afford, $400, $500. So you can just think of like the kind of capital you have to put into that. So I think rental assistance could make more sense. But when we talk to policymakers, they are, if you think about Section 8, how oversubscribed that is, how even though it's helped so many people, you get in an exhaustion situation pretty easily. So, but I think we think in a limited area it would make a lot of sense, because otherwise we're turning to new construction capital, which is just not efficient.
Again, and focusing on the cost effectiveness, and in this
Yes.
case, rental assistance being more quote unquote cost effective.
Just to compare those numbers I was throwing out, if you could, for example, find a place to rent for $1,500, $1,800, $2,000, then all you need is that difference to make up, instead of having a big amount of capital up front.
Yeah, the average housing choice voucher in Rhode Island through the Section 8 program is $1,100 a month. So as Mike says, to do that through capital, you need maybe two and a half times the amount per month to build something new. So
I'm glad you
providing
bring that up,
providing
'cause-
that context.
No, absolutely. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time while being able to have more efficient models for producing affordable housing, while at the same time taking care of those that need immediate access to affordable rental units. Looking now towards recommendation number 2, there was a reference to the real estate conveyance tax and making an adjustment to it to generate further revenue. With that said, my question is, when you look at the real estate conveyance tax, is the recommendation to lower the threshold as to when the tax is triggered, increasing the rate of the tax, or a combination of both?
Yes, I'm gonna leave that to you policymakers. So just so you know, at RIPEC, we're relatively uncomfortable about recommending raising taxes. That's like not what we're about. But there needs to be more revenue in this area, and it would make most sense to come from housing-related revenues. By the way, there's a huge need in the homelessness area that I think people know about. There's one-time money that's been paying for that that's going away. So there's a big need there as well. But I think the idea of having a higher level tax over a certain amount is a progressive approach. Right now, it's relatively modest. The conveyance tax is a pretty imperfect kind of approach, to tell you the truth, because you're just grabbing transactions when they happen. So it's more just like right now. There's not a lot of transactions, and so if someone sits in a home for a long time, they're not going to pay that tax. So, but it's something worth considering. I know short-term rental fees are also something that people talk about, but.
Ms. Crandall?
Thank you. So I'd like to ask, why are the costs of building affordable housing so high right now? Why aren't we getting more units built given all the funds that are invested? And relatedly, thank you for mentioning and recommending the public developer at the end there. Would a public developer be able to deliver more housing at a lower cost than our current system? Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. Why is this so expensive? I've struggled with that question. Some of this should just not cost this much. I can offer you an explanation that the model itself drives cost, just due to its complications. I mean, you have to piece together financing from, one development in Rhode Island had over 20 sources of financing. So imagine how long that takes and how complicated that deal was. So you're paying for lawyers, you're paying for accountants, you're paying for the financing costs. Some of it is because you're competing with a hot private market, that the nonprofits get areas that are more difficult to develop. There's some of that. But we point out a development, Parcel 9-2, in our report that was on a piece of state land that had no acquisition costs, that was pre-prepared for development, and it was $535,000 a unit. That one is, I have yet to hear a good explanation for why that cost was so high or why that project needed to be prioritized. As far as the public developer goes, I think if you look at the private market right now, you can buy a duplex with 3 bedrooms on both sides, brand new construction, for less than $600,000. That means for $300,000 a unit, you could get a 3-bedroom condo. The developer is also making a profit. So the cost of construction is $250,000, $240,000 per unit. So it's in that environment, it's very difficult to justify some of these high per unit costs. I understand construction is more expensive now than it was during the pandemic, but that is not an explanation for why these costs have gone up so much. So could a public developer, imagine the state puts out an RFP on a piece of state land and says, like, you've got to come in at under $300,000 a unit, and don't apply if you're at 425. And then I think some of this is, look, the pandemic era money came with timelines, to be fair, right? The money had to go out the door. So I think some of the things related to cost overruns, maybe in a different environment, would have, maybe raised more flags along the way. But like I said, these were supposed to be competitive programs. These programs are overprescribed. You're talking about $100 million in applications for $50 million worth of money. I just wonder about the developments that did not get funded when you're seeing some really high cost overruns from preliminary to firm financing, 20 to 30%. So I'm happy to take your insight on Parks and Rec too.
Anecdotally, we had a large, I would say large for Burwell, roughly 100 to 160 unit affordable housing complex that went in the last 4 to 5 years. It was on property that was owned by a well-known developer for a long period of time, and he had to sell it because as a for-profit developer, he couldn't afford to do the site work necessary. And that comes out of, and again, anecdotally, what I see around the state when you see where places are getting built right now, it's on, we have overdeveloped. We have limited amount of space to actually build housing. And what's being built on right now is stuff that cost a lot of money to prep to put up a building, whether it's 1 unit of housing or 160 units of housing. You have to do a lot of site prep. You have to bring in the utilities and all these costs. I'll give you an example. I want to say at some point in time, for sewer lines alone, it was like $2,000 a foot to move a sewer line, to put a sewer line into a new development. And that's on regular ground, not with ledge. And in my community, there's a lot of ledge. You can't get away from that. But again, to your question, why does it cost so much to build? Well, first of all, we've already built on all the land that we can build on easily and affordably. Anecdotally, I'm saying this anecdotally, I'll leave it to the analysts to confirm this. But all that's left is exceptionally expensive properties to build on. You have to bring the utilities in. You have to do the site, again, you have to do the site work. You have to blast ledge. And a developer for a for-profit motive couldn't have put in a 160 unit complex on this property. It took a not-for-profit developer to come in and do it. Even when he did it, he was forced to use substantially more expensive building materials because of the environmental factor that plays into it. Not only are those materials more expensive, but again, anecdotally and just observation, they aren't as durable. I mean, I see screen doors in a complex that's only 3 years old that have been ripped out because there's no wood. They had to use some sort of composite material that couldn't hold the screen doors on. But this material is substantially more expensive because he was required to use that to garnish the federal funding and the state funding necessary to build the property because there were mandates. And these are units, there's no air conditioning. There's no central air because of the requirements that were put onto them. So you're not even incorporating in a for-profit building. You're installing HVAC, full HVAC units. These nonprofit units, these affordable housing units are only affordable because they even put some of this stuff in. So again, this is anecdotally one development that I'm seeing. You walk up and down, the same developer put up 2 buildings on what we know as Pasco Main Street. And again, there were no HVAC units, but they were the only ones that could afford to do these projects because a for-profit entity couldn't make a profit developing the site. So the costs, why we're seeing houses being built in places that you never seen built on 10 years ago is because they're getting $500,000 for a house that used to be $350,000. So now they can do the site work and do it. So that's, in my opinion, anecdotally, we've built on all the buildable property. Unless we want to go up, unless we're willing to go up in like cities of Providence, there's not a whole lot of buildable property left in the state.
Mr. Weiss?
Hi, Mr. Hamill and Mr. DeViesa. Thanks for your report. I read it and I thought it was very well done. And I just want to note some things that I thought were interesting in there. You said the rents, well, we know rents have increased considerably, and all of housing costs have with the record inflation. However, you said that the rents have not been increasing as rapidly as maybe reported in the media or outpacing income growth. I think some of the data on the rent increases in Rhode Island may be skewed towards the luxury market because when I look where this data comes from, it's CoStar and it's rent.com, And I know a lot of smaller landlords do not advertise there. And as you said, Rhode Island has sort of the third oldest housing stock in Rhode Island. It's made up of all these triple deckers. It's not, like some more modern cities are all apartment complexes, communities. And so when you're getting all your data from CoStar and Rent.com, that's all buildings with doormen and pool and gyms. That's skewing the data. But it's undeniable the rent has gone up. But in the media seems to make it go up the highest in the nation, and I'm really not sure they got the accurate data. The other thing is that it's impossible for them to know the rental increases that come at renewals. They're only looking at asking rents, and because rent is so high, the renewal rates are at an all-time high. The tenants want to stay because oftentimes they're offered to renew at less than new tenants asking rent. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know how accurate anyone has the data for rent. However, you pointed out that Rhode Island does have significant challenges, but less so than our neighbors in Massachusetts and Connecticut. So obviously that's fueling the demand for people to come here. I noted that Rhode Island was a top 10 for inbound people moving here, and Massachusetts was top 10 for people moving out. So they are moving here, and notably some of the states with the worst housing affordability issues, California, New York, New Jersey, Oregon, Massachusetts, and Maryland, are also among the most highly regulated. Yet in this state house, there have been and continue to be numerous proposals to adopt similar regulations, word for word from those places. And meanwhile, Rhode Island ranks last in the nation, per your report, on housing production per capita. So I don't think the solution to our issues is more regulation. It's clearly increasing housing production, and to your report, doing it more efficiently, because we're not making a dent. But I do want to compliment Rhode Island and the reps in this room for devoting, $330 million towards housing. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money, and you're saying the work is still ongoing. We only have completed 70 units. But one side note I think that's relevant to our commission is, our neighbor in Connecticut, they took $20 million of that ARPA money and just used it for lead abatement for private landlords, which I know has become a priority for our state, but no money was put there. So, and obviously the homelessness is all in the news, and we need to do something about it. And your report, you didn't really touch on it so much, but I think your report said it was almost $100 million of the ARPA funds was supposed to go towards that, but I wasn't really clear about what was done with it. So I don't know if you could clarify that. Thank you.
Some of the money was committed to capital, right? So expanding shelter capacity, Echo Village, purchasing Charles Gate. $10 million of the homelessness money went to the Summer Street project, 176 units in Providence. It's a Crossroads development. The rest went to operating. So, I mean, it's not a matter of just producing a bed. You have to, that requires services to maintain that, and that's, a lot of it went to operating. So some went to capital to expand the shelter capacity, and then the rest went to operating costs.
And this is what I was referencing before, because typically the ARPA money was supposed to go to one-time things, but in the homelessness area, it went to operations that are continuing. So there's a serious fiscal issue because the money's not going to be there, and we're at a level of homelessness that is much higher. And we're also at a level of services that the state is picking up at a much higher level. So I think I haven't been back to the office to see the governor's budget, but this will be one of the things I'm looking for, like how do you fill that particular gap?
Mr. Dana?
Yes. One of your recommendations was for creating a state rental assistance program that seemed modeled after the federal Section 8 housing choice vouchers, or at least from your comments, that was what your inspiration might have been. The federal Section 8 program, in addition to housing choice vouchers, they also fund project-based, so place-based, and my question is coming from your comments about the greater cost effectiveness or efficiency of larger housing developments, and often also the inefficiency of the initial capital outlays. Did you look at about whether it would be efficient or possible for the state to do more of a place-based rental assistance program, so it's guaranteed long-term contractual affordability for the tenants, and instead of a large capital outlay to the developers, sort of a long-term contract of guaranteed rent that they presumably could use for favorable financing?
We haven't looked at that specifically. I can tell you that the state rental assistance program that we cited earlier, there are 25 households still left on. Originally it was about 690. That was a project-based program. I mean, this was project-based rental assistance. It was not a voucher, so those were attached to units. I can also say that it's not uncommon for our project-based vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, since only 30% of the vouchers are eligible for project-based, to be paired with the tax credit program to build 30% units. It's very difficult to build 30% units without them, and what we saw in the SFRF programs is that, I mean, it was something like 85% of the 30 and below units came with either an operating subsidy or a project-based Section 8 voucher. So Rhode Island Housing does run an operating subsidy program. It's the HPF ELI program. And like I said, the vast majority of those 30% below units had either one of those two operating subsidies attached. So we are already doing that, but unfortunately we're essentially double subsidizing our affordable housing developments that way. So these aren't going to like the private market to attach to a mixed income development. They're going into these affordable housing projects.
I have one question. It was previously stated that we're here for the Landlord Tenant Residential Act, and everything you've presented is very fascinating, and there's 5 recommendations, and they're all multifaceted. And my question is, we can't fund everything, we can't do everything. What would you think would have, out of your recommendations or the subsections of the recommendations, the most bang for buck to close the gap as soon as possible, understanding that 25,000 is a long ways away, unfortunately, but what would you think would be the most important thing to look into outside of just being able to snap our fingers and increase supply?
Stole my answer, but I think it's not a snap your fingers situation, right? But concentrating on middle income and market rate development, I believe, due to the aging housing stock in Rhode Island, the nature of our rental units, adding that supply would stabilize and I believe lower rents statewide. And if you can do that, then you need less subsidy at the back end to help the renter. So if I could pick one thing, but to me, like, some of this is we have to get more cost discipline in our affordable housing programs. That just has to happen. Like I said, the math just doesn't work at current subsidy levels. We cannot subsidize our way out of this problem. It's a $4 to $5 billion problem to do it this way. And to me, that starts with controlling costs.
Thank you. Ms. Crandall?
Just to go back to the public developer for a moment, what you just said reminded me of this. Would the public developer sort of solve some of the problems you're raising, both by, for example, state already owning land, getting around that complicated capital stack that you said is it primarily relies on LIHTC, and then also the mixed income is, I know the public developer would be more free to do mixed income complexes. Can you speak to how it might address some of the problems that you've raised today?
Sure. Again, while public developer models are, they present what I would consider to be an interesting option. There isn't a ton of long form data on public developers since the model is pretty new. But I think what I outlined earlier, right, using state land, getting around some of the land regulations that way, and then using an RFP process that has strict cost controls in it, where the state then maintains the asset or sells it at the end of the process, would be more effective than what we're doing. So I don't have a ton of insight because there isn't these are new, but we've got we're at the point we have to try these innovative approaches, right? And there's $10 million that the General Assembly has set aside. It's the second time they've set aside $10 million that could have been used for a public developer. The first tranche went to public housing and essentially in Newport. It went to one development in Newport. The only about $8 million was allocated. 6.75 went to Park Home 5 in Newport. The other two built 11 units, 2 in Pawtucket and 9 in Narragansett. So people were helped. That's something I don't want to discount. Our public housing does need assistance, but I wonder if that would have been an opportunity to test some new things. And I would like to see that happen with the $10 million that's currently available, to see if a test project can be done in a more cost-effective way. Again, with the state then maintaining a public asset, either for a long period of time, or again, that's an asset you can then sell and use to fund future developments.
Any other questions from anybody on the committee? Thank you. I just want to take an opportunity to say thank you again. This was a wonderful presentation, your second presentation of the day, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us and answering some of the questions that we had regarding the information that we received.